This podcast is presented by Silverdocs, AFI Discovery Channel Documentary Festival, an international film festival in the nation's capital. More information on Silverdocs can be found at silverdocs.com.
I think the impulse is the same all the time. It's to tell the story, or to share with an audience the story, more than it. I think it goes back to seeing things happen in daily life, but also being part of a group, listening to a person tell a story, just the storyteller. You know, whether it's on a street corner or at a dinner table. In a church, and I don't know where, but storytellers, some have a way of telling a story, grabs that audience, and the audience is rapt with attention. But the impulse is to record that and to share it with other people. Now, I think one looks back at the beginning of motion picture imagery, whether that was on celluloid, now it's on video, but I think the first impulse is to, what is the first impulse? It's to record it or interpret it, you know? And in a funny way, one says to record it as documentary, to interpret it as dramatic fiction. And for me, I didn't see I guess I have not really seen the difference emotionally or psychologically, the effect that emotional and psychological effect it has on an audience. I don't see the difference between the two. I think it's the same. I think, yes, one can say this is a documentary film as in nonfiction, et cetera, but that's just the in a way just the surface. I think in a way the line is blurred for me between the two, and I'm constantly going between that impulse to record something so that we can share with others, and others in other generations that come could learn from it, or to interpret it, and sometimes you do both. Well, I think this is probably the most important element of the moving image, and that is to record history, or at least to be a witness to history somehow. I think, for me, I'm just fascinated by history. I'm fascinated by diaries from whether it goes back to the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or 19th century, 20th century, because it records the daily life and how people really lived, and it brings us in touch with those of the past. And in order to learn the past, I mean, it's important for us to know the past in order for us to be able to form the future, I think. And we owe it to the generations to come. You know, it's the old story. Those who don't know the past are doomed to repeat it in the future, and maybe in a bad way. I grew up in that area. I grew up in the area that became that was the 5 Points and became Italian-American area in Chinatown. And so I sort of grew up around that church, in fact, that cathedral, St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. That's where I went to church. And there's something about the cobblestones, the walls, the nature of the buildings, even though some of them were built around the turn of the century, the backyard tenements, And there was something about that area that was just reeking with the story, you know, not just the sanitized ones. This was stuff that really how the people lived and suffered and struggled. Immigrants coming to New York and settling there, and it was not a great place. It was not a great place. People tend to, you know, romanticize it. I mean, what was nice about it was the sense of the neighborhood itself, where you would have a tailor shop, you'd have 3 groceries, you'd have a funeral parlor, you'd have a pork store, you'd have a fish store, you'd have, you know, this sort of thing. And there was always something, there was a church or this, or 2 blocks away there was synagogues. There was the Jewish area right from the Bowery, Third Avenue. We'd cross over there, and 2nd Avenue was all Jewish and Italians mixed together. It was quite something in Chinese. And in the midst of all of that, at that time, it was the end of the gay 90s of the Bowery. It was the end of it. It wasn't the best part of it. It was the end of, it was like Skid Row, basically. And so growing up seeing all of that, it was all compacted into 3 blocks or 4 blocks, you know, and made you aware of a lot of different groups, ethnic groups and races and religions. No, I think documentary, I mean, the very first films were, in a sense, documentary, quote unquote, right? I mean, Lumiere brothers in France photographed the daily life, in a way. They photographed the train coming into the station. They photographed workers leaving a factory. Jean-Luc Godard said they were the last impressionists, in a way. But you look at that footage now, and you really, a whole 100 years comes to life, you know? And so that's just a camera in one position, just photographing a daily activity. So imagine now, add the story to that, or add an event, or whatever. I just think that I come from a time where the documentary and the narrative film really, people were accepting the documentaries, particularly in the late 50s, early 60s to late 60s, as feature films to be shown in theaters, alongside the latest film by was Hitchcock at the time, was sort of in the end of his career, and there were other people coming out of Hollywood, but around the corner you had Al and David Maisel's film Salesman playing at Cinema One, and Frederick Wiseman's Titicut Follies. There were feature films you'd go and see on a Friday or a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. And so for me, I think to relegate documentaries to a small screen or as a subdivision, I think is doing a disservice. I mean, don't forget, Flaherty went up to the North Pole, went up wherever to do Nanook of the North, and created the first quote unquote documentary, in a way, which of course he had to restage because all the film burned. Yeah, but that's an interesting point right there, you know. But still, the thing about it is that there were films. People went to see these things. They weren't just, one's a documentary, one's a narrative film. Yes, there are different styles. We can talk about that. But why relegate the documentary to, like, I'm addicted to watching them on television, but it shouldn't only be there, and they shouldn't only be projected on a small screen. I like DVDs. They're shiny. And you put them in, and this imagery comes up, and it's, I have a giant screen in my house, and also a screening room, able to have I actually have a little 35mm screening room too, but in my office area. But there's nothing like being with an audience and sharing that experience. I don't do it very often anymore because I'm getting older and going out. I'm too busy working. I'd rather spend some time reading, but we dreamed back in the early mid-50s or late 50s, my friends and I, and some of my friends, some film critic friends at the time, in the late 60s, we dreamed of going into a store and picking up a film the way you'd pick up a book. Could you imagine that you could put you have Theodore Dreiser here, and you have Shakespeare there, and but imagine if you have Hermano Olmi here, and John Ford there, and Robert Flaherty, Penny Baker, and I mean, to be able to look at these films from time to time, right at your own, it changes the experience. It changes the experience, there's no doubt. I mean, you choosing to see a film at a certain time in your own home is very different from saying a film is being played in a theater for only 2 days, and you make the time to go see it. I think it's better in a way. Yet, I must say that it's a debatable situation, because I saw some of the greatest films ever made. I saw them first on TV, Citizen Kane, with commercials. The Third Man with commercials, documentaries that, things like this. And so when I got to see him on a big screen, it didn't necessarily change. In fact, it enhanced it. But I would have loved to have seen those pictures on a big screen first. There's no doubt about it. When you can't, it's not bad on the small screen.
This podcast is presented by Silverdocs, AFI Discovery Channel Documentary Festival, an international film festival in the nation's capital. More information on Silverdocs can be found at silverdocs.com.